Revolting News is honored by the presence of two very distinguished documentary filmmakers, Schein and David Mehlman. They will be discussing their most recent film, Left on Purpose, an intense and personal study of Tuli's friend and fellow peace activist, Mayer Vishner. 18 years ago, Tuli and Mayer were partying at the War Resisters League Christmas party. But life took a turn for the worse for Mayer, so he decided that his final act of protest would be suicide. He asked his friend, Justin, to film and to document his decision, and this they did, giving us a film that recently won the Audience Award at the IFC Documentary Film Festival. As someone who was in that audience, I can understand why. His suicide note, published in the New York Times, read as follows: "Forced into this world, left on purpose." I assume there's a double meaning to left, considering Mayer's Occupy and Yippie politics. We can see Mayer's act as a final act of revolt. But Justin and David, you are going to discuss your film and tell me what he's revolting against.
That's a good question. I mean, I think Mayer saw everything through a political lens. I mean, he grew up and came of age at in the early '60s, and really kind of developed as the protest movement was developing, the civil rights movement, and then the anti-war movement. So he kind of made his life in that community and made a decision to live with kind of protest at the core of his being. So,
I mean, I think that he, really any authority figure from a very early age, he questioned for certain, and I think that he said that he never quite felt like he fit in until he found the peace movement, and that was a place where he could truly be among other people who were questioning authority, questioning the acts of people in power, and for things that he believed in, things like peace, the end of war, things like personal expression of love, of the agency to do with his life and time and body whatever he and his friends wanted to, without being penalized for it or controlled in any way, and that the job of government was to make sure that people were safe and not to control them in any way. And that's what his approach was to school as a young person, what his approach was to war and fighting in it, what his approach was to drugs and sexuality. So those were all things that I think he really found himself really moved by and at home with. And when the movement ended and a lot of that went away, he found himself in an oppressed place, I think.
But I think it's important to note that when I started the film, I didn't expect that this was the path I would be taking. I was interested in Mayer's history in the movement. I was interested in his perspective on the world today as somebody who had dreamed of a social revolution that never really came. I could tell that he was struggling, but I didn't know the extent of it. So, I thought I was making a short profile of a fascinating man. And it was only months into the filming that he revealed to me that he wanted to leave, so to speak.
What was your reaction to that?
I was shocked in a way, but in another way, I guess I wasn't surprised, because he was slowly revealing his kind of sadness to me, and his drinking became drinking problem became more apparent. So I was shocked because it's not something you ever expect somebody to actually say to you. And then I had to kind of reassess my role as a filmmaker. Is it possible to make this film ethically? And I had to assess my role as a friend, because we had become friends. What does one do? If you ask Mayer, how can I help you? He would say, you need to help me die. And that's not what we normally think of as helping somebody. And so I had to kind of reassess the whole thing. Yeah.
Did he have any belief in an afterlife? Did he have any religious convictions, or was he expecting anything besides a
Yeah, no, he was very dedicated to his atheism, to his belief in humanity and nature, but not a spiritual nature. So, yeah.
Okay.
So, that Dave and I have worked on many documentaries over the years, and I think when you make nonfiction films, you're constantly coming up against ethical questions and issues, and those are kind of interesting as a filmmaker. But this was kind of the granddaddy of them all. Like, your subject wants to take his life, and he is trying to implicate you. Mayer was a Yippie, and Yippies believed in spectacle. They believed in
Right.
getting their message out. They believed in using the media to convey the message. So, understanding that, I was very uncomfortable, because this was not my issue. I didn't set out to make a film about this. But it became clear to me, I did some research, that, first thing is that suicide is a growing mental health issue, and that more, the suicide rate for men Mayer's age has increased dramatically over the past decade. So this is, Mayer was not alone in this story, as alone as he felt. So it became clear to me that it was a story that was worth telling. The question was, how does one tell it without crossing certain boundaries? And, I got Dave started to edit while Mayer was still alive, and it became clear to us, I think, that I needed to be part of the story, that part of the story was not just Mayer's struggle, but our relationship. So,
I think it's interesting. I think that Mayer, Mayer had a history of depression, but had clearly a period of his life where where he was dealing with it. And I think that while this is a film about Mayer and about what was happening at the end of his life, it's a film that's universal. It's about aging, and it's about aging in isolation, and I think it's about what happens to a lot of people his age. But I think you also have to ask the question, because he was such a ideal-driven person, was the loss of the ideal, did the world around him in some way impact his decision, whether it took a long time or a short time? And it's that question of is Mayer's act of rebellion or revolt, and his desire to have agency and control over his life, which you can trace all the way back to his early beginnings as a revolutionary, and if this is his final political act, what is the sort of societal responsibility for that as well? And I think that it's an intricate balance, because I don't think you can blame it on one or the other. It's just like any human being is a weave of so many threads. which is what I think makes the story so interesting and resonant. But I think that his disconnection from a movement, whether it passed him by or whether it was crushed in such a way that he couldn't relate, definitely impacted the course that his life took, and ultimately that wound together with his depression and coping with things that people who weren't yippies but are his age are coping with as they get older. And I think we as a society take a lot of those things for granted, but there's a lot going on that
poverty being one of them, certainly.
Absolutely.
The cost of healthcare and just the difficulty, trying to maintain a lifestyle that. But go ahead.
And poverty as a result of a society that he believed in being crushed. Like if his society had come to be, if his ideal had been realized, would he have been in the same place? And I think that he would have said, look, I think that Mayer wanted to take responsibility for his own life, but I think he also would have said that, acknowledged that it was bigger than him, and
sure. But Mayer had great skills as an editor, as a journalist, as a activist. He had a lot to offer the world. And though, yes, the movement did fracture, there certainly was a lot of work, and there is always a lot of work to be done. And Mayer could have contributed to that in a big way. And in my opinion, there's no question that his clinical depression made it difficult for him to see that as an option. I wouldn't have gone forward making the movie if I wasn't in touch with his doctor and his psychiatrist, and I knew that he was under their care, and that they were doing their best to treat him. But he had been talking about this for years, and I wasn't quite sure if he really was planning to take his own life, or if this was just his kind of way of being.
And getting attention.
And the fact of the matter that his mentor Abbie Hoffman and his close friends Phil Ochs and other friends, including Tom Prasad, had taken their lives, I feel like only made it more viable for him. There is this concept of kind of contagion in suicide, where if somebody in your life takes their life, it statistically opens the door to your own suicide. So, it's a number of issues coming together, as Dave said, and certainly the alcohol didn't help. Over the years, I think, took a toll on his body and his brain, and while he was still very sharp and had a lot of life in him, I think they say that when you get to be 60 years old after 20, 30 years of alcohol abuse, that it really kind of, you hit a wall in a way. And Mayer didn't want to live that way anymore, and didn't want to be a burden, and couldn't see a bright future, unfortunately.
And I think that's common with a lot of the population. I think that people of his age, when they were coming up, didn't expect to live till they were 70, 80, 90 years old. There was a whole different expectation. And while I think that a lot of the problems that are having of men in his age group have to do with exactly that. They have to do with health, comfort, financial issues that come with living longer than you planned, and that's and I think you add that to Mayer's desire to and firm belief that what he was suffering from was as real as any terminal disease. And you then combine that with, I mean, these are the arguments that he would make. Combine that with his desire to have agency.
Acting, I think that it's unfortunately it's a statistical reality. In starting to put this film together, we contacted a specialist in suicidology, somebody that works with suicide prevention, and they have very set rules that they believe the media should follow in discussing suicide, because they feel that it shouldn't be glorified, it shouldn't be talked about casually, and it was very helpful in at least opening our eyes to how we spoke about it. They were very clear that they preferred if we didn't specifically tell his method of killing himself. And I respect that and understand that. I mean, just as I wasn't going to give Mayer the information, I thought he was capable of figuring it out himself if that's what he wanted to do. I feel like I wasn't going to create a how-to video. And part of that is the fact that, my role wasn't just as a friend, but as a journalist. And I think that there's certainly a responsibility.
Okay, I have some questions from a neighbor and friend of Mayer's by the name of Therese Coe, who is a poet, writer, and professor. And she lived across the street on McDougal Street from him. And she sent me these questions by email. Said, ask him what he saw and heard from Mayer, but what was Justin's observations? Well, I think your whole film is your observations, right?
Sure. I mean, Mayer was quite a charismatic guy. I had met him on another film, and I made a film called No Impact Man.
Yeah.
Mayer was in that. So, go ahead.
Okay, did he sense any tragic quality in the planned suicide? Whether Mayer said it or not?
Well, I think suicide by its nature is a tragedy, even if it's something that someone thinks is their best option. I mean, it's a tragedy that it's come to that Mayer didn't feel that he had other options. I mean, I respected his rights to his own life and death, but yeah. I mean, this is something that I came away with, is that the whole concept of suicide is such a broad concept, that there are very different scenarios between a young person who's depressed and is contemplating suicide, or who hasn't seen a doctor, and somebody like Mayer, who, while it's tragic, and he had been under doctor's care for years, and while it was his thinking was clouded by his depression, I think that he made a very deliberate decision. Wasn't a rash decision.
Was he ever funny? Did he make you laugh? In the film, he does, right?
Yeah.
Quite a bit. He maintained his sense of humor throughout this gloom and depression. He had a twinkle in his eye, and he always... How could you remember any funny incidents?
Well, even just like that, at one of his deepest moments, it's in the film, where he is sitting there and he's just recovered from a drinking binge, and Justin brings him the liquid food, and Justin says to him, well, maybe if you stopped drinking, you have a little more money, and you wouldn't be in this horrible situation. And Mayer looked at him and said, yeah, and if your grandmother had wheels, she'd be a bus. And that's typical Mayer. Going back to the tragedy line, Mayer's, to me, is tragic in another sense. He's almost, as in the literary sense. I mean, he's kind of a Shakespearean character. He is so fully aware of his situation, yet so blind to it as well, and the possibilities of it. And he's walking around in this deep existential. Granted, we've captured him in the middle of this existential crisis, or obviously towards the end. But I guess if you're in the middle of an existential crisis, it means the end is near sometimes. But he is a tragic character. He's a tragic, the way a Shakespearean character is tragic, because he has that complexity and so much is at stake, and there is so much good. Yet ultimately, there is a deep and dark and tragic ending to him.
And he used to talk about his fear that he would lose the will to die, which is kind of poetic and tragic and
Ironic,
yeah.
Yeah, had he given up on women and sexual relations?
Well, I mean, like activism, he didn't feel that he had the patience or the...
There were so many things, actually. I mean, he felt like there was no woman. I mean, because throughout the years, he had a classified ad that he put out there.
Yeah, he did. He wanted a relationship.
But ultimately, he didn't know how to make that happen in a long-term way. But I think also by the time the filming started happening here, he hadn't given up on wanting it. He had given up on the realistic possibility of having it, having to do with the fact that he couldn't get himself organized, the fact that he had no money, the fact that that he was too far down this road, that it really was, there was no woman that would want him, and like he says in the film, if there's someone out there for me, I know her already.
But the irony is that he said that sitting on a bed with a woman that was clearly interested in him. The glass half empty kind of situation that he was in. He didn't allow himself the possibility. And similarly with the money. I mean, right at the end of his life, he got a $50,000 check for his things from the University of Michigan, and gave it away in a second. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
I think it's easy for people on the outside and who don't have experience with depression to look at Mayer and say, it was right in front of him. All he had to do was do something. All he had to do was try. And I think that the nature of his depression and the nature of his personality and his stubbornness conspired against him in a way, to take advantage or to even see the possibilities beyond maybe short blips when the garden was in the springtime and he was out of the house and he had some hope for good things to happen. Those hopes were quickly dashed, and I think that was the case with relationships for sure.
Well, there's wonderful footage of the garden in your movie. It's so positive and life-giving, and that's how you met him, right? At a community garden.
I met him at the LaGuardia community garden when he had been one of the original members, and even though he said he hated gardening because it was so unpredictable, and I mean it was something that gave him a reason and really put him in touch with the earth, and he had gone to agricultural high school in Queens and had always been interested in gardening, and he was for many years the only guy growing vegetables in a garden of flower growers. So for him that was a kind of a political statement.
Did he grow marijuana?
Not that I know of. No, and if he did, he wouldn't have been able to grow enough for his for his needs. But yeah, he was a big pot smoker, and I mean, I think unlike alcohol. I think that the marijuana really was medicinal for him, helped him to interact with the world and be more relaxed, and yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a great legacy of that we hope to preserve and to spread. We hope to teach. I mean, we feel like so many people below the age of 40 have no idea what the Yippies were, or and their legacy is not so established, unfortunately, in textbooks. I mean, their legacy is alive and well in, Occupy and in the strategy of many activists, but many don't know about it. And so hopefully we'll be able to get people interested in that history, as well as kind of the issues around aging and depression and, activism.
Okay, so where can we see your film? Therese, Mayer's neighbor, wanted to go see it, and she couldn't find it anywhere. Where are we most likely to be able to see your documentary?
Well, we really finished it a few months ago. We had our premiere at the end of September at Woodstock, at the Woodstock Film Festival,
Right.
Which was great because that felt like a very home crowd. And then we played it in Europe a bit, and then at Doc NYC. And we are at this phase where we're showing at festivals and looking for a distributor and hoping that we get some momentum so that we can get it online and Netflix or something like that, and have it on TV, whether it's PBS or HBO. So, and there might be a small theatrical distribution. We certainly think that there's a big possibility for educational, film schools, social work schools. So I think there's great possibility, but right now it's just the beginning of the process. Yeah.
So where can you be reached if anybody wants to show your film? If anybody
great.
sees this, where can you be
My
reached?
email is justin@shadowboxfilms.com.
And you're on Facebook too.
I'm on Facebook. There's a Left on Purpose Facebook page. There's a leftonpurpose.com is our website. Dave has the david@shadowboxfilms.com. It's been a long haul working on this film, 5 years or more, but in some ways it's just, the life of the film is just beginning, and we really want to keep it alive, keep it going.
Okay, so that's it for our Revolting News show. Thank you very, very much. It was wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.